Welcome to Quarantine Conversations, Episode 5. I'm Samantha Lane, and today we're going to chat with Ben Katzner. He's a comedian and writer in New York City. He and I went to college together, and I've always appreciated the way he brings laughter and creativity to all that he does. We're going to chat about vulnerability and risk and perseverance and the importance of laughter during tough times. Bonus, he'll clue you in on some of his very favorite comedians. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for joining, Ben. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Sam. I appreciate it.
Yeah, all the way from New York City.
Yeah, just living quarantine life here in New York. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's a whole direction we could go as far as what quarantine life. Maybe I'll ask a couple of fun questions at the end,
Sure.
Things you've learned. But it is super exciting to have you as a part of this series and these quarantine conversations. I think that there's a lot that we can learn from comedians, and you happen to be one. And it is something that is totally foreign to me to think about going on a stage and trying to make people laugh. And as we know, a lot of people are terrified of public speaking in any form, particularly, I think, the roasting that can come from, is it bomb when you do good, or is it kill when you do good?
So yeah, doing well is killing and doing poorly is bombing, yes.
Okay, so if you bomb, just how do people recover from that? So anyways, just can you tell us a little bit about your interest in comedy, what it looks like for you as a stand-up comedian and your current role, and let's just start there.
Sure.
Your current role, I don't know.
I'm the head director of stand-up comedy. So
Great.
Big deal. You're so lucky to have me. No, just kidding. I have been a stand-up comedian for the last 6 years. I started in Minnesota, and I have eventually kind of matriculated my way to New York City, where I've been living for the last 3 years and performing here. And I try to basically be out every night of the week, and if not every single night, 6 nights a week, and doing multiple sets each night. So that's different shows, that's open mics, which is kind of practice for us, and all sorts of things, and just kind of running around the city and trying to get better and do as much stand-up comedy in front of a real audience as I can. So that's kind of the gist.
What's the vision? What's the dream or desire here?
That's a great question. For a very long time, it was some of my main goals were to perform stand-up at the highest level. So whatever that is for me, just try to reach the exact top of what I could. So some of the best clubs, people like to maybe do a late night, do a stand-up special, things like that, put out albums. So something on that level. I'd also like to, at some point, create and sell my own show, I think. That would be great. And then a very important thing for me has always been to use comedy to, because I feel like for me, comedy is very much I'm saying selfish, but I don't mean it in a negative way, but it is a very personal thing for me. I really enjoyed it, but I would also like to make that help other people. So turn what I do comedically into an avenue to give back to the people who have helped me and the communities that have helped me and stuff. And then I think finally, I just don't want to be bored. That's really one of the last things I want to try to diversify what I'm doing. So whether it's just stand up, whether it's, dipping my toes in the waters of acting, whether it's writing, all this different stuff. So those are kind of the 4 main things that I'm trying to accomplish with what I'm doing.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It made me think about how it can really be about mindset and how you frame something, because what you were saying made me think of how you could see it as, I never want to stop learning. I want to be growing. I want to be creative. But then you could also see oh my gosh, the burnout, out at 6 or 7 nights a week. And these are late night things, I imagine, so you're sacrificing sleep, you're sacrificing time with other friends. There's sacrifices and there's commitment definitely that comes with this passion that you're pursuing.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think that's the hardest part to kind of get. I'm glad you said that, because, it does seem at its front value here, on its face, you could look at it and be like, well, you get to be out and do all these cool things every night. That's great. And, at the highest levels, you see a lot of stand-ups doing really cool things. But I think what people don't necessarily see is the hard work and the sacrifice that it takes to get to those points, because if a stand-up is very good, it looks like what they're doing is the most natural thing and easiest thing in the world. So yeah, there's a ton of sacrifice that goes into it. So it is an interesting dynamic for sure.
But and how do you choose to embrace that? I think that's part of when I thought about who would be interesting for me to kind of interview and have a conversation with. You were at the top of the list because I think that individually now, for putting into the context the pandemic climate that we're in, we are all having to persevere in new ways and having to sacrifice in different ways and commit to things, and I'm going to toss out the word vulnerable here, which I know there's lots of different reactions to how people, but I think a lot of people say, oh, that's so vulnerable to be practicing a new set to an audience you don't know at all. I'm a huge lover of Brene Brown. I know we were talking offline before this, and I'm super, if you don't know who she is, people, Daring Greatly is a book I'm rereading right now. She's got a Netflix special called The Courage, I think it's called. It's an hour long, kind of like TED Talk style. But her definition of vulnerability is something that I've been working on for a lot of years in my life, and that's uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And I'm like, that sounds like what you're doing, but it's not vulnerable. We would never look at a stand-up comedian or a performer and be like, oh, they're being so weak. We're like, wow, that's so brave. You go, that's awesome. I wish I could do that, right? That's how we react to people. So this can go a lot of different directions, but I guess maybe what do you hear when you hear people calling you brave on stage, or does it feel brave to you? What does the risk feel like? Let me just toss 4 or 5 questions at you at once.
Sure. The bravery thing is an interesting thing, because you do hear that, and I'm like, I don't know. My brother served in the military, and those are people I would kind of consider doing work that is brave, and obviously, people it's comedy, it's jokes, it's I get where they're coming from, because for a lot of people, standing up in front of people and trying to invoke emotion, or trying to nail something so people understand you is hard, and it is kind of a weird, it goes against human nature a little bit, but I don't think I would never, if you ever hear me call myself brave, feel free to call the police on me or something, because that's too
So does it feel vulnerable to you though? I mean, are there times where you're that shaking in your boots feeling, or now you've done it enough where it's this is what I do, or can you think back to those early times?
Yeah, I mean, that's the vulnerability aspect is interesting to me, because in some ways, yeah, what you're doing is, in the definition of vulnerability that you just shared, I would say 2 out of those 3 things definitely I'm like, oh, that does make sense, if that's how you define vulnerability. But I don't know. For me, I think what is, again, kind of interesting about stand-up is you can appear vulnerable without actually being vulnerable. Everything I'm saying, I'm in control of, Everything you're hearing about me is what I'm letting you hear about me. And I don't mean that to say that comedians are fake or anything like that, but there is something intrinsically control driven about getting up in front of a group of people and being like, I'm going to talk now, and then giving your views on things and your feelings on things. And so I think there's not vulnerability in that, but the idea of getting up in front of people and saying what I am saying I believe is important, I think that is vulnerable, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit on both sides of things. But
I'm glad you brought up control. It makes me think of expectations. And I don't know if you have a story or just a thought around when you're able to let the craft be what you want it to be, and let go of any expectations of how it has to be. I imagine that's been maybe part of your journey. And I know that when we were catching up before this, you're it really kind of stinks that I feel like I'm at, the best I've ever been right now. And now I can't go out and do sets and stuff. But yeah, anything around expectations.
Yeah, expectations. It's an interesting thing, because no one should be in my opinion, no one should be pushing you harder than you push yourself, right? To me, you're one of the ultimate determining factors of where you go, because you have to persevere. You have to push through a lot of different stuff, right? But at the same time, expectations can get in the way of enjoying like these moments that you get to have in comedy. In comedy, in stand-up comedy especially, there are so many little moments where you're like, this might have been the best set that I've ever had, but 12 people saw it and no one's ever going to see it again. I taped it, but it doesn't look as good on tape as it did as I was out there, you know, like, so you have these like beautiful little moments that like kind of just become for you and the audience. And like, in my opinion, you can do two things, right? You can kind of, if your expectations are set in a way where you're like, well, I didn't get anything from this set, then that set was worthless. I don't personally like that point of view. I would rather be like, every set you have, every audience you have, every show you do, that is a unique opportunity to have something like uniquely special for that group of people. I've heard comedians say something along the lines of, we're never going to have this exact combination of people in this room again. So like you get this special experience. And then I think that changes my expectation of like what I want to do. I'm like, I'm just going to pretend that every time I'm out there, you know, this is a new group of people, whether it is or it's not, like this is a new group of people. So I have to give them my best. I have to try these different things. I have to make this a worthwhile experience for them. And that's where a lot of my expectations come from. I feel like if I fail in creating a fun, unique experience for people, or like getting a point across that I was trying to get across, that's where I think about expectations. I have to stop myself from being like, you know, this next set is going to be the set that, you know, really breaks me open in the industry or whatever, because that can kind of bog you down a lot.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying reminds me so much of being in the present, and how that's the only place that we can really feel good anyways. Like if you are just 5 steps ahead, 10 steps ahead all the time, trying to think of, well, who's in the audience? Who's going to get me to my next show? Is this going to get me that book deal? I mean, whatever it might be, then that takes you out of being your best where you're at. And earlier this week, I recorded one of these conversations with John McGraw from Vision Pursue, and we talk about that and emotions. And it's so much about, what can I control in this current moment? And that's actually going to be what's best for me and what's best for them.
Absolutely. That's beautifully said. That's, you can, the old football coach I used to have a phrase that's like, control the controllables. And like, so that was exactly, you know, it's all the little things that you can do leading up to a show, during a show, while you're doing this stuff, that determine all the other things. There's so many big things that I can't control who's in the room. I can't control who feels a certain way about what I'm saying or anything, but I can control like how I deliver a thing. If I want to, you know, if I want to say a new thing, if I want to smile during this joke, or like frown during a different, like all that sort of stuff is all within my grasp of handling, you know, these performance aspects. And it is kind of weird because you talk about being present, and comedy, from my understanding, is I'll say paradoxical, right? Maybe that's the wrong word, but like, so on one hand, yes, you need to be present. You need to be in the room. You need to let everyone know that you are here with them, right? I think that's very important. On the other hand, sometimes I will be telling a joke and I will be 2 steps ahead. I'm like, oh, I'm saying this, maybe I try this thing, or like, oh, that person reacted this way, maybe I talk to them for a little bit. So it is kind of this weird thing, and that's throughout every part of comedy. There is no one way to do things really, other than to work hard and like try to be nice to people. Like truly, those are like the 2 steadfast rules. But everything else is like, yeah, you do this, or you do this, or you do both of them at the same time. It's like a really
creative freedom.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Well, and 2, it's a passion and a profession that if you wanted the quick like trophy, this isn't it, right? I mean, I like to listen to some of the bigger name comedians, you know, their books that they've got out, whether it's Amy Schumer, Amy Poehler, Ali Wong. Like, it's so interesting how they're all like, we see these names and we just think, oh wow, they were just always so funny and everybody knew them. And it's like, they're on the track you're on right now. They've been there, you know, night after night after night. And so definitely like you're not doing it for the high fives and the roaring applause at the end. Like you're doing it because it feeds something for you as a person.
Yeah, it's a very comedy can be. I think so much of it is mental and like how you're being things are being put in front of you that you might have never thought about before. You start thinking about how people perceive you. You start thinking about how you're trying to relate to other people, and you're hearing things about yourself, or you're saying something that you think is important and you think is funny, and no one's reacting in the way you want. And like there are all these mental landmines that you kind of have to deal with, right? And one of the biggest ones is, it's a comedy. I don't even know. Comedy isn't a race. People might say it's a marathon. I don't even know if it's that. I think comedy is just a jaunt in the going forward, and then you can go as fast as you want, you can go as slow as you want. You have to understand that no matter what speed you go, there's going to be someone who just is driving a car right past you, and you just have to like live in that world where you're like, you mentioned Amy Schumer, you mentioned all these people, and like they have varying levels of how quickly they got to their success, and you have to understand that it could take you 20 years, it could take you 6, it could take someone 2 months. Like you just don't really know. So that comes back to controlling all the things that you can control, and like I try to have blinders on with a lot of that. It's not always perfect, but I feel myself getting better at comedy and feeling better about myself in comedy when I'm less focused on other people and more focused on what I'm doing. And I would say being excited for like my peers and my friends and people I've met along the way when good stuff starts happening for them.
Yeah, that whole idea of staying in your lane, let the other person run as fast as they want to in their lane. I want to ask a little bit more about the comedy community, but before we go there, I was thinking about how, I'm not a neurobiologist or anything like that, but I imagine there's things around laughter too that bring us into the present moment. I mean, if you just think about the last time you belly laughed, was it even possible to be thinking about like what you were having for dinner later? Like when you're laughing, you are totally immersed in that moment, and it's unlocking, these chemical reactions of the emotion that, too, I think is something that in these very changing, uncertain times when people are probably feeling really vulnerable, how to lean into those present moments. I don't know if you have, that's not a question, but anything to say, I guess, around just laughter as good medicine.
Yeah, I mean, as I always say, I'm not a doctor, but I do think medicine is always the best medicine. But yeah, I think being able to, I can talk about myself personally and just say, I think being able to laugh at certain things has helped me a lot. And whether that's I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls with friends I haven't talked to in a long time. And like earlier this week, I was talking to some of my former teammates on the St. Thomas football team, and we haven't all been together talking in, I don't know, a few years, right? So, someone would say something, just pull up a memory that I haven't thought of in years, and I was just like on the floor, like truly buckled over, like laughing so hard, tears are coming down my face because I'm like, I haven't thought about that moment in forever, right? And so I think stuff like that is great, but at the same time, and not to get too dark, I know I'm dressed like I'm about to do slam poetry, but I don't want to get too serious, but like, laughter, being able to laugh at the darker things in life has been pretty beneficial for me, and is also probably one of the reasons I do comedy. Like there are a lot of different kinds of comedy, but like some of my favorite comedians definitely are people who can take these harder issues to like and find a way to make them funny. Like it's a very beautiful skill when people can really master that. So yeah, I think laughter is important, but I think the way we use it is so varied, and that's what's kind of beautiful about it.
Well, it's a bid for connection, and to go back to Brene Brown, like that's what helps us survive and thrive is belonging and connection. And so if we have these dark things in our lives and we're shoving them down and we're pretending they don't matter or whatever it is, that's not going to help us connect. But if we are finding a way, even through laughter, to, you know, to take this thing and say, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable in how I present it, but now we have a chance to connect and do something with it. And you know that that's the whole reason I set up these quarantine conversations, right? Because I just really wanted to catch up with you.
I love it. I'll take it. That's a great excuse.
So about the comedy community, what is it competitive? Is it really like, hey, we're all in this together? I mean, just maybe take us into that world for a second.
Sure.
Maybe not too deep into the world.
Right. it was 2014, and I was it's I think probably like any other field, it actually, in a lot of ways, you can make these generalizations, but then you'll start meeting people and you'll be like, oh, it's this individual kind of thing. But I would say, I think comedy used to be like uber competitive, like really like if you're in my way, I'll trip you so I can run past you type stuff. Let's call that like the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, whatever. And then, from the like late 90s to the mid 2000s to even now, there's like a comedy boom, right? Like comedy just really blew up. People are making, like you see Dave Chappelle gets like $60 million or whatever for a Netflix special or something. And like the money that's involved in it has become astronomical. So it's kind of crazy. And you would almost be like, well, it's clearly more competitive now. But I think what has kind of happened is comedy has gotten, it's a competitive thing. People still want things, but I don't think people are so actively like it's you or me. I think people are kind of like, okay, there's room for maybe not all of us, but definitely like a lot of us. Okay. And because there is big money tied up into it, like Comedy Central and Netflix and Amazon Prime, Hulu, all these places are like taking comedy, and there's like independent thing. Like you could just put your comedy special on YouTube if you want and build an audience that way, or have like a podcast that brings people in, right? So people are starting to realize that like it doesn't have to be me or you. Like there's kind of room for both. And honestly, it's probably better for us if we work together, because then we like our audience is kind of join forces and support both of us. So it's okay. It's not as competitive as it probably seems. Occasionally you'll run into someone who's a little bit more, I'll say, old school, and it can be kind of interesting. But people try to support people because, like I said before, it's mentally tough. It's brutal, and I think that was probably the biggest change, is that in the late 80s, early 90s, 2000s, whatever, people would see very funny people struggling with very serious issues, and not everyone would make it through, and people would be like, hey, I love comedy, but like I don't want my career to go down like this person's did. How can I do it differently? And I think people started reassessing and being like, oh, maybe if I'm a little less competitive, maybe if I take care of myself a little more mentally, physically, whatever it may be. So I think people are pretty like aware of that. I don't like, a lot of times people are always surprised when the comic doesn't, after a show, they'll be like, hey, can we get you a drink? And sometimes I'll be like, I'm not like drinking or whatever. And they'll be like, what? I thought you were, come on, I thought you guys are all party animals. And you just kind of have to be like, I appreciate that. I respect where you're coming from, but like, this is also a job, and I have 2 more shows tonight. So I kind of
and I've been out 6 nights in a row,
right.
and
and I think that's,
and it's not your only job. You're working at it, like,
right. Exactly. So I think that those are probably the 2 biggest things. I think people kind of, instead of like a frat party, people kind of turn it a little bit more into like a fun startup or something, and then people have started taking care of themselves and each other a little bit more. So that's changed the aspects of it.
Yeah. Oh, that feels good. I'm curious how then is everybody kind of handling having to pivot right now? So I know you're doing an online show, so you can tell people about that, and just what's that been like to not be on stage like you typically, I mean, for what, 5-6 weeks now you've been?
For me, I think the last time I did comedy was mid-March, or like live comedy was mid-March. So it's tough. Yeah. So my friends and I, my friend Chloe Radcliffe, who's a writer for the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and my friend Caitlin Palufo, who just did stand up last year on the Stephen Colbert Show, and it's very funny. It has a bunch of different podcasts out. We started a show together, a streaming live show, which is a version of this very cool live stand up show that we were truly about to launch right before all of this happened. We were looking at this cool venue in NYC and had all these awesome artists that we were planning and all these cool ideas. And then Mother Nature was like, you know what? Why don't you guys chill for a little bit? So after a little break, we kind of decided, hey, let's put this thing out. So what we're doing is what a lot of people are doing. So we live stream a comedy show. It's our show is a little different. It's not just stand-up comedy, but there are a lot of people now who have been live streaming, just people kind of in their rooms, kind of like this, just doing stand-up comedy. But our show has some games. It does have some stand-up comedy. It has audience interaction. We have like a chat that people can talk to us. It's a really, for us, it's trying to find positivity in a world that can kind of be, right now, is a little tough to find positivity in every now and then, right? So our show mixes humor, and we're trying to mix in a little bit of real life stuff where, you know, not everything's good, and we talk about that too. So that's pretty exciting for us. Our show's called Something Good, and just real quick, it's at Something Good NY on Twitter and Instagram, and the YouTube channel, if you want to check it out, is Something Good. We stream our show every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. So if you are interested in anything I've said, feel free to check it out. But there are like hundreds, maybe thousands of people right now who are live streaming shows and doing more podcasts and doing different things, because you're right, you have to pivot. And for me, this has been an interesting time because I do a lot of comedy, but I also still was holding on to a day job. My thought was, I will do a day job until comedy kind of forces me out of that. And then what happened is I am doing a day job because I was forced out of comedy a little bit because of what's going on in the world. So I have friends who are some of my friends don't have income streams
without
coming in
their comedy.
Yeah, because they were full-time comedians, and now, you know, you can't go out and do it that way. So a lot of them have tried to like find different avenues, whether it's Zoom or a podcast or something like that. But people are trying to do different things, but it's tough. And not even just comedians, like anybody who's part of an industry where you count on people coming into your business, and like people actually being there are struggling right now. It's tough to watch, but I'm hoping, you know, a lot of people are being very creative and a lot of people are being very generous, and I'm hoping that helps us push through all of this.
It's a super funny show. I loved the balance that you guys had, and Chloe and Rachel, is it Rachel?
Caitlin.
Chloe and Caitlin, and you, like the three of you have a nice rapport going for sure. You can tell you've told a lot of jokes together, and it's just super fun to watch. So I'll definitely put that in the show notes and make sure people know where to find you. Yeah, I was thinking, okay, let me check the time. How long am I talking? Yeah, all right, we're close on time. So I have a couple other questions to follow up, and then make sure you plug where people can find you outside of that show too. But just on a personal note, and you're welcome to take this whatever direction you want, but two questions. What's something that has been the hardest for you in quarantine, and what's something that has maybe been like a positive surprise?
Sure. Yeah, I think the hardest thing is just I miss being able. One of the reasons I moved here, not just for comedy, is because New York is the city that is always alive. It's always active. There's always something to do. Literally, whether it's 6 p.m. or 6 a.m., something's happening, and that's always cool. I work a lot of late nights via comedy, and one of my favorite things was just like coming home late and kind of seeing the city in a way that maybe some people don't see it. Hopping on the train and running into like one of my comedy friends, and then we have like these great conversations on these very slow train rides home at like 3 a.m. And you're mad at how long the train ride is taking, but then you get mad when it's done because you're like, we were having such a good talk, you know. And that would just happen randomly. There are times in New York where I'd run into people that we went to St. Thomas with. I'll just do a random shout out. Once I ran into Kamal Muhammad and Nick Bussa and Callie Chamberlain at a random.
Oh my gosh, what a reunion!
Right, and these are just random people that Sam and I had graduated with at St. Thomas, and just out of nowhere, no one planned it. No one. The only reason I was on that street was because a coffee shop me and some friends were going to was too full, and I love that about New York. I love that at any moment it seems like anything is possible. That's always really great, and I kind of miss being out on that, definitely.
Yeah, but, that spontaneity and
absolutely
what could happen. Yeah.
But a positive is when like I don't know, being forced to slow down is like really, I'm connecting with people that I don't think I didn't feel like I was able to take the time to really connect with before. And like, you really get to see people have been checking in on us, which is great. And people I haven't talked to in a little bit, maybe have been reaching back out. And it's just nice to know that people care. And I'm like, oh, these are relationships that I want to still foster once we get through this, And sometimes when you get busy, it's easy to be like, oh, I'll do it later. But now it's like, you're not busy. Let's do it now. Let's call this person back. Let's, have this conversation. So that's been really nice.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Well, shout out to your redhead beauty, Allie. Tell her she can come on over to Kansas whenever, and we'll drink mimosas, and it'll be great.
She'll take you up on that. I'm sure she's tired of being locked in a one-bedroom with me.
I'm sure not, because you make me laugh. So, good person to be locked in a one-bedroom apartment with.
Maybe.
But, okay, so what else? We can find you on Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter is probably where I drive the most people to. So it's just at Shaq Katzner, and Shaq like the basketball player, SHAQ. Katzner is my last name, KATZNER. I don't know. I post a lot. I just joke. It's just jokes on Twitter. If you're trying to, get takes on stuff, that's just, I don't know. That's where I am. But then again, the show, Something Good NY, on Twitter and on Instagram, and then Something Good is our YouTube page, and we stream every Tuesday. I think the shows are fun, and they're only going to get better. And once we're done with quarantine stuff, we'll probably transition into some other stuff where you can still keep hearing us. So we're trying to build a fan base now and get on the train early. I'm really excited about where this is going to go. So,
any parting thoughts?
This is great. I'm so glad that you had me on. I'm very appreciative of this. What I've seen of the series so far has been great, and it's awesome to be a part of it. And I hope people listen to you, because you're one of the nicest people I know, one of the smartest people I know. So
thank you.
I hope I hope other people have been helped by you the way that you've helped me.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. And I just love that it's maybe just with wearing the title of comedian, I feel like I've been smiling the whole time, even though we weren't talking about jokes or anything the whole time. But this has really been a gift to me today. So thank you so much, Ben. And I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for having me. So bonus question, I forgot to ask, who are some of your favorite comedians to follow? Sure. So I like some of the classics. Obviously, I like Chris Rock. I like Dave Chappelle. Someone I really love that I think in the comedy community is super well known, but I don't know how many people know of him outside, is Dave Attell. I think Dave Attell is this great comedian. What's the last name? Attell, Attell, I think. Okay. You'll have to check the spelling. Look him up. I'm pretty sure that's it. And then, so those are guys who, if we're gonna give like a movie rating to their comedy, let's say those are rated R people, PG-13, whatever. But like they're not clean. They're not clean. A couple clean comedians that I really like are Brian Regan, who I think everybody probably knows. And there's a younger guy. His name is Preacher Lawson. He's out of Florida. I saw him a couple months ago in New York City, and I'd seen him a couple other times, and just floored me. He's so funny, unbelievable. He's very he moves around a lot. He's very fun to watch. And then there's another younger person named Taylor Tomlinson, who's really funny. She just put a special out on Netflix. She's great, and hopefully she'll do our show at some point in time. And then I know there's a lot of names, but I gotta do one shout out. Someone I think is absolutely amazing, and if this wasn't all happening right now, would be a name you would start to see popping up more and more. My buddy Ethan Simmons Patterson is probably in my opinion, one of the funniest comedians in New York City. And
this young dude out of Chicago, and just truly like the way his brain works and the way he talks about different things are so interesting, and it's just fascinating to get someone with his background's view on just the world and his relationships within the world. So those are some
Ethan, and what was his last name?
Simmons Patterson, hyphenated.
Okay, great. I'll put these people in the show notes too. I was laughing when you said Brian Regan because my dad was watching one of his specials the other night, and then for 3 days continued to just spontaneously laugh at the table when he would think about this particular joke that just had him rolling. So
yeah,
that makes me laugh, and I didn't even see the joke live. I heard his like back. Anyways, Brian Regan. Cool. Great. Thanks again.
Yeah, right. No problem. Thank you.
Many people can relate to feeling stuck when you're navigating a huge life change. It can be so discouraging when you're unsure about what next step to take. I'm Samantha Lane, a certified life coach, and I partner one-on-one with men and women to create clearer thinking and more purposeful action. I happen to specialize in those who are anticipating retirement, as that's a transition that's going to impact all areas of your life. If that's you, or if you know someone who's navigating a big life change, I hope you'll sign up for a free strategy session at lumina-coaching.com. Thanks for watching Quarantine Conversations. I hope you enjoyed.